Nothing personal, but God no, it's even worse than Rust in a way of syntax noise.
No! God, please, no!
This is a comment I got on an earlier video I made about web API bindings with ReScript. Yeah, fair point. ReScript can get a little verbose when you're using flat maps and nested switches and need to unwrap everything to get to your data, so it can get ugly. But there's good news. The ReScript team is experimenting with some brand new syntax that could change everything. Alright then, let's go. So to get started, you need ReScript 12 beta 10. In your ReScript JSON, you want to add a section experimental features and enable let unwrap. First, take a step back at what the code example of last time did. It basically had a title, had a counter, had a button. When we look at the browser, you can see the button, we increment, the counter changes, and at a certain point, the color of the heading changes. The code we had for this was rather straightforward, but it did involve some option and nulls and values and all that kind of stuff. So we have query selector for our button or strong. We can't, assume they're there. There might be null. Then there's a little helper to check if something is instance of HTML elements where some conversion happens after runtime check. We are checking whether our button and our strong element exist. If they both are true, we're trying to add an event listener. We're trying to grab the strong, the text context. Then we're just, that could be absent as well. So we need to convert it to an option. Then we flat map. Then we try to convert the string to a number. I mean, you get the point. This was a fair critique that this is all a little bit verbose. And today we're gonna try and figure out if we can do better with the experimental syntax. So first example here is to try and use options with the new syntax and see if that can improve things. I have a little helper to convert my elements to a heading element based on the runtime check. Yeah, just a helper really. It's a little bit different than what we had, but point is the same. Then we have this dollar function, which is a little nostalgic. It takes a selector and it will do query selector, but the new syntax doesn't work with null or nullable. So this conversion to option, it's just all wrapped in a helper. It's going to be a little bit more convenient. When we first take a look at our init function, we want to grab the button. We want to grab the strong tag. And then here we can use let question mark and immediately unwrap the thing we're actually after, the happy path. So this is the button, this is the strong. And then I can use the button as if it's an actual button instance. It's no longer an option. If any of these were to fail, it's just going to return none. So this entire function does return an option, and if either one of the let's question marks that should unwrap an option doesn't unwrap an option, it's going to return none. Currently you cannot use let unwrap at the top level. So if I were to do something like let unwrap some, you're going to see that let unwrap is not allowed for top level bindings. So this is a current limitation. Is this going to be a permanent limitation? Not sure, but experimental syntax. That's why we're wrapping things in a function. And I do feel like the use case now is really much in transforming something along the way that returns an option or a string. In this case, I'm wiring event handlers, so you can already see that it's not like a perfect fit. Because in this case, we're grabbing the button, we're gonna add event listener if we found it, but we still need to return an option because this will, if this is not found, if this word will be like button 2, invalid selector, none comes out of this, then it just, shortcuts the whole rest of the code. And that's why the rest of the code eventually needs to return an option. Anyway, we're adding the event listener, we're getting a click handler. And then in this case, we are also creating an expression. Again, we need to capture an option if we want to use that. So we just need to return it. We're going to see if the strong content had some text. We're going to see if that text was able to be converted to an integer. And then we're just going to increase it, set the text. If the value is larger than 5, we're just going to update the color. When we go and update the color, we need to grab the H2 heading. Then we need to try and map that to a heading so that the color is blue. And yeah, again, we need to return an option for the syntax to make sense. If we take a look at what this compiles to, you can see that this is all more or less as you were to expect it. So this is a zero cost feature where there's like no extra runtime cost to use this syntax. This just really compiles to something that you would have written manually with the more verbose existing ReScript syntax, and the output is going to be the same. Under the hood, this new feature does a PPX transformation. PPX is like a macro kind of thing for OCaml. So the ReScript compiler is in OCaml. And basically on the AST level, some syntax transformations will happen. So I'm going to use the compiler. I'm going to access the compiler directly and add in our new feature flags. This is actually what's under the hood happening if you have the experimental section in your ReScript JSON. And we're going to see what this transformation does. So only parse and then reprint whatever transform happens. And when we take a look at this, the H2 is a more interesting example. So we see here we have some, but actually we're just going to switch here and we're going to switch again. And you can see that there's like an internal attribute added to this. That's kind of the transformation that's happening. And that's also the reason why if we don't have found any elements, then we're just going to capture that and we're going to return that as well. So that's the reason why it's currently is expecting. In our case, if we're just doing something a little bit more mutable, like we're just changing the color here, would have been interesting if this could just be turned into unit, because it detects that the last thing here is something that returns unit. There might be room for improvement, but at the same time, I'm just, suggesting things. I have no idea how difficult that would be to implement. So I can definitely understand the way this works today. So the let question mark syntax works with both option and results. And I tried to come up with an example with using results. Currently, you can't mix and match them just yet. Maybe that's on the roadmap, maybe not. If we were to do the same example, but using results, I tried to come up with an error type. So everything that could go wrong, I'm trying to model in this error here. Either a element wasn't found, so like bad DOM selector, that's what the string is, or we couldn't convert an element to a heading element, which is what we do when we counter increases and gets to a certain level, and then we change that to blue. And if we, for example, can't find the content, then we're going to capture it. So we have a DOM element, but doesn't seem to have text content. Or if that text content wasn't numeric. This is very verbose. In domain-specific code, this might be really the thing that you're after. As an escape hatch kind of thing, I have a print error just that we can see what's going on. Whatever, I just described. We're just going to console log what actually happened. There is going to be a little conversion function over here. We still have that DOM element where we want to have an actual heading element where we do a little runtime check. Object.magic is just like a internal hack. It's a free pass to just convert one type to another. You tend to use this from time to time. I don't really know a better way of doing this in ReScript. Dollar is again our nostalgic function, but we can just do a pattern match. If we have a value, we're just okay making that an okay result. If we don't, then we just grab our custom error here that we didn't find something for a selector. The update function, same thing here. So we're first going to try and get the H2. Then we're going to try and map that. If that both returns the OK side of results, then we can set it to blue, and that's all fine. In our init function, we're grabbing the button, we're grabbing the strong tag, we're attaching the event handler. And this is, again, the nice thing about ReScript. Everything is an expression. So everything within the curly braces is like a scoped expression. The final thing over here determines what the type of the expression is. This is going to be a result. And then I'm just going to print it to, end up with a unit inside of my add event handler and my click. And you can see over here that the text content is null. And so it would be nice if the let question mark also worked for null and nullable, because that's what this null is. I first need to check, does it have a value? And then I can say it is actually a result. And because it's a result, the let question mark and OK is going to work. The other thing here is that I just do need to map this all to be the same error type, because once you start with a let question mark, that's the type it eventually expects to be at the end of the expression. So these errors, they do need to match, otherwise things aren't going to work out. However, you can see that we are grabbing the value, happy path again, we're setting the text content, and we're just forced to return an OK again. And at the end of the init function, we also just need to return that result, because if either one of those were to have failed, it's going to return the error case, and that's just what we need. And that's where this print error comes in. It just takes the result and converts it to unit, or because of the printing of the error. So that's how we get around that. If we take a look at our browser, you can see that the example still works. And if we were now to screw a little bit with our HTML elements, for example, instead of an H2, let's go with an H3. and they would say, okay, element was now found. So on each click, it's going to try, because 7 is larger than 5, it's going to try and find that H2 element, but it's not going to work out. Same thing if the button isn't found. So immediately the init's going to say, okay, couldn't find the button. So that all works as expected. And from a domain point of view, we did model correctly what went wrong, but I can understand that this is again very verbose and maybe a little bit too academic to be practical. To wrap up, we'll take another look at the transformation. So the update H2, it does what you think it will do. It gets a switch on the dollar. If it did find the element, it's trying to map that to a heading, and eventually it will set the color to blue. If either of these things return an error, it's going to return that error. So the error, it's not the error thing itself, but it's the entire results, this alias here. So that returns the results, and that's why at the end of this thing, we do need to return the same type, which is the result, in this case, the OK case of unit. Okay, that was the first look at the let ? Syntax. I feel like it's not quite there, but yeah, fair enough. It was the first attempt. You can definitely sense that there's potential to this, and I'm very curious to see where this is going. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Don't be shy to reach out to the ReScript team. Let them know what you think about it, either good or bad. It really helps to shape this feature when positive or negative user feedback is coming on this. It's now in an experimental phase. It will be for a while, but yeah, the more people that chime in, the more voices that are heard, the better this thing can get. Thank you very much for watching. Until we meet again.